Welcome to the Fiscal Fortress. Michelle Baoyu, a distinguished lawyer, and Eric Chung, a veteran hedge fund manager, deliver insightful commentary on finance and the law and actionable advice. The Fiscal Fortress, where wealth meets wisdom.
Hey, Michelle. Great to see you. Another super exciting week in the world.
Yes, it is great to see you. Lots to talk about today.
A lot to talk about. One of the things that's dominating the news is, of course, Trump, Doge, executive orders, new federal laws, and there's also some new California laws. We should talk about like the new laws that are coming down the pike. Would love to hear what are some of the most significant federal tax laws and things that are affecting wealthy people that people should know about.
Well, I think there is a lot, as we both have noticed by reading the news. I mean, there's so much to cover, but as it pertains to our audience with the federal estate tax exemption, things are still at a very high level at this point. It's indexed to inflation. Every U.S. citizen, green card holder has up to about 13.99 million per person, which means for a married couple, they can have up to $28 million worth of assets and still be free of the estate tax, which is 40%. So that's at a very high level. It certainly protects the majority of people. And that's a big deal because when we compare how high it's gotten back from just recent memory. So recent memory to me is 2008, right? Remember when the financial crisis hit? The most recent one, there's been many, but 2008, at that point, the federal estate tax exemption was only $2 million per person. And now we're at a level of $14 million per person.
Wow. And remind us again, like, was this a recent jump? Like, how recently did it go from 2 to 14 million?
Oh, it's been progressive. After 2 million, then it went to 3.5 million, then 5 million, and then 8 million. So it's been progressive and it's been creeping up. But at the end of this year is when the law expires. And so if nothing is done, then it will be brought down to 5 million, which indexed to inflation will be about 7 million per person. But chances are something will be done by Trump's government before the end of the year so that it doesn't drop down drastically from 14 to about 7.
So that's potentially very good news for our clients.
It is good news. And in terms of gifting, the annual gift tax exclusion, which it sounds fancy, but all it means is that every year we are allowed to gift up to $19,000 per person to anybody we know. So if there's a grandparent out there and then there's husband and grandma and grandpa, you could gift $38,000 per child and grandchild, which is a very fast way to give away money. It could be hundreds of thousands of dollars gifted that way without having to trigger the lifetime estate and gift tax exemption. But anyway, aside from those numbers, there's some other changes in terms of the IRS wanting to target more high income taxpayers. And so there's definitely we can expect greater scrutiny for higher income folks and just making sure that they are paying their taxes.
One question for you, if I may, love to come back and talk about the IRS, very important. But going back to the gift tax exclusion, what is the tax consequence if you're receiving the gift? Is that income to the grandparent or the child? How does that work?
It would not be income until they receive it. And then if suppose I got 19,000 from somebody, I don't have to report that. However, the income that I generate from that would have to be reported on a going forward. So the actual receipt, that's not the reportable event. It's the income that derives from it and capital gains later. That is what's going to be taxed.
Right. Makes sense. So hypothetically, not recommending that people do this, but if they spent it, that's that's tax-free for both the giftor and the giftee. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is one way to just have it not taxable in either person's hand, the grantor and the grantee.
Interesting. And then going back to the IRS, you mentioned that there's going to be a lot more scrutiny on high net worth individuals. What do you make of the fact that the federal government, Doge specifically, they're going to be firing thousands or tens of thousands of IRS employees? And I've read there's speculation that that could actually reduce the frequency of audits.
Yeah, that is very concerning because I also read that that there are going to be a lot of tax. The IRS employees are going to be losing jobs in the thousands, and that is very disturbing because we need these people to make sure that taxes are being collected, and so there's some mention that I read about how every dollar that is spent on these audits can actually receive $12 in revenue for the government. So I don't think that's the smartest way to go, to cut staff in the IRS.
From the perspective of our clients, many of which, however, are high net worth, should they feel that the chances of being audited are higher, lower, the same?
They can expect greater scrutiny. With who knows how the software and AI and how things get triggered, but with less people, I'm sure that people like Trump will use ways to target the higher net worth taxpayers, and so it still can be consistent that there can be layoffs and still target higher net worth individuals. So it's better to err on the side of safety, make sure you have a good tax professional, and make sure things are kept, as well as possible by records.
That's a really good point because one of the reasons that Elon Musk is terminating a lot of people is because they are using a lot more technology. Or this is the speculation that they're getting rid of people, but they're going to increase the use of technology. And you mentioned AI. So there was some controversy where Elon Musk was allegedly, he and his team were putting information from the Treasury into AI to catch waste, fraud, and abuse. It's not crazy to think that, when they fire all these people, now they're going to, scale up the use of AI and computers to catch tax fraud or people not complying with tax laws. Like that seems very foreseeable to me.
Absolutely. The danger, of course, is that the software is not where it is currently to have high accuracy. So, as we know, when we do our own searches using AI, there is a lot of room still for error. And so, one has to definitely use AI with caution.
Are there any other federal tax laws or regulations that we should talk about?
I have some other comments that I'm going to make about the capital gains and how that could be changed and revamped. But I think it's also good to talk about the California changes. Since both of us live in California, a lot of our clients are California based. There's going to be good news and bad news with changes on the horizon. So, on the good news is that to deal with the safety and crime in the streets of San Francisco, for instance. There was a lot of drug use and shoplifting. There are definitely bills that have been submitted where it would have a harsher penalty and then jail, for instance. That is going to be the punishment for theft and drug use. The other things that are concerning, for instance, is having open cannabis lounges and entertainment zones where alcohol can be served with much less restriction. And so that does cause some concern for some people, like myself, to have areas where in the city people can just drink at any hour and without the restrictions that certain places, restaurants, establishments have, and to have like drug use places for cannabis, just like Amsterdam.
This is actually a relatively recent thing, but there's been a profound shift in how we all think about law and order. And it wasn't very long ago. I remember that in Oregon, just a few years ago, they essentially legalized, hard drug use. And I remember very recently, the prosecutor in both Oakland and San Francisco, they felt like their policy was decriminalization, letting people out of jail and not prosecuting crimes because there was a feeling that the justice system wasn't fair and that it was overly punitive. But both of those prosecutors, uh, I think it's Ms. Price, I don't remember her first name, but in Oakland, and then Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, they both got recalled. And, crime uh, markedly increased in both Oakland and San Francisco as a result. Well, in my interpretation, is directly as a result of those policies. So now the pendulum has really shifted, and to your point, a lot of people feel that we have to be tougher on crime. So this is something that is a relatively recent change. Like I say, only 2 or 3 years ago, people were actively being let out of prisons and jails and not being prosecuted for crime.
Yes, absolutely. And now there's going to be new laws that actually prevent people with mental illness and violent crimes history that they can be held for an additional 30 days until police enforcement, they can actually figure out where to put these people instead of just letting them on the street as soon as their time is spent in jail. So there's definitely a push for more safety. And on the safety front, there's going to be a new law that says that there's going to be no parking at least 20 feet away from any intersection. And that's to allow drivers to be able to see pedestrians coming out. So there's definitely an increased, the purpose is to increase visibility by reducing parking.
Those seem
Uh,
like pretty good changes. Bringing it back to financial issues and things that might be important for listeners of this podcast, are there any changes in California laws that will affect wealth or taxes?
I would say, yeah, there's taxes that are being proposed in California that would have additional taxes. So California doesn't currently have an estate tax or a wealth tax, but there is definitely talk and movement towards taxing anybody that has over $30 million to an additional tax. And even so there's a 30 million threshold and then a 50 million threshold that California is considering to tax additionally.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I just from a personal perspective, that really concerns me. I had read that something on the order of well, I won't get the exact number, but millions and millions of people have moved from California to places like Texas and Nashville and Florida because of the tax policy in California. I also remember it wasn't that long ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a wealthy CEO tax imposed in San Francisco, and it's these types of things that you know um, it's not about passing judgment, but I think we have to be cognizant of the impact. Like if we raise taxes, what does that do to business and wealthy people, and how do people respond to that? Do you have an opinion or a view on that, Michelle?
I agree that people will be leaving, the wealthy people will be leaving California if these taxes are passed. And there's also, so California is one of the highest, has one of the highest state taxes for income. And there's even talk about raising the top marginal rate for the highest tax bracket in California. So that's even worse, right? Whereas a lot of people already left for places like Nevada and other states and Texas because there's no state income tax. California is actually trying to increase that rate for the wealthiest.
Well, I've spent quite a bit of time in Lake Tahoe, and a bunch of those people, those wealthy people, they just live right across the border. I ski at Palisades, which is close to Truckee in California, but you can literally drive like 40 minutes, 30 or 40 minutes, cross the Nevada border, and there's a super wealthy billionaire enclave called Incline Village. And, the people there, they're Nevada residents, everything's cheaper, taxes, gas, shopping. It's a weird situation.
So housing can definitely be impacted if people, the wealthy, start moving out of the state because of these increases in taxes. And then for housing, because there's such a lack of housing and there's such a homelessness issue in California, there's state mandated requirements on how much each city has to build for housing, and non-compliance will fine cities 50,000 per month, which is a big deal.
That's a big deal. Yeah, in my city in Piedmont, they're building, they're doing a lot more building, and for decades there was minimal or no new developments. But I think those laws are now taking effect, and municipalities are responding. So that's, arguably a good thing, like to reduce, increase housing supply and to reduce the cost of housing. But I do worry that high levels of tax will actually reduce the total amount of tax revenues if people basically leave the state. That's a real concern.
That is a very real concern. So we'll see how things happen if the wealthy get taxed more in California, and whether they leave, which I think is a very predictable result.
Bringing it back to Trump, there have been, and I mentioned, Doge, but I understand there are a ton of other executive orders that our listeners should potentially be aware of. Would you mind highlighting or mentioning a few that are of top of mind, or that are top of mind for you?
There's some industries that Trump is particularly interested in. So, for instance, he is going to establish this National Energy Dominance Council, which will affect the energy sector. And so that sector is definitely new for him, and that he wants to create. He's also big on the cryptocurrency industry. And so those are areas that he's definitely focusing on.
Mentioning cryptocurrency, we've talked about this before, but there is not only executive orders, like he's appointed teams of people to look at crypto and AI. There's also pending legislation in Congress. There is a law called the Bitcoin Act, which has been supported, or is being proposed by a Senator Loomis. I believe she's out of Wyoming. This law would require the U.S. government to buy or hold 1 million Bitcoin, which is about 4%, 4 to 5%, close to 5% of the total supply of Bitcoin. And the speculation is that it has bipartisan support, and there's a reasonably good chance that this thing will pass. And if it passes, this would obviously be very advantageous for holders of Bitcoin. So yeah, the current administration is definitely mixing things up and doing some interesting things.
Hmm. What else have you heard about on the Doge initiative?
Yeah, it's super controversial. I mean, obviously, this is in the papers every day, but there's chaos, fear, and panic amongst federal workers. Elon Musk and his team are taking a page out of what they did out of what he did rather at Twitter. And for those of you who don't know, Twitter, now X, was a public company. It was bought by Elon Musk, and he came in and fired, I think, over 75% of the workers in a very short period of time. And it caused massive destruction. Elon would say that, but look at Twitter today. It's a leaner and more profitable company. We don't know if that's the case because it's a private company now. The critics of Elon would say that it isn't all good news. There's some critics would say that Twitter there's more misinformation on Twitter. It's less safe, and that they would argue that with the characterization that it's a more profitable, better company. But more importantly, bringing it back to the federal government, a lot of people wonder whether that is the correct mental model for reducing spending. And the key thing is when you fire indiscriminately, which is the perception that a lot of people have, this is kind of very consistent with the Silicon Valley move fast and break things mentality. And The problem with the federal government, critics would argue, is that if you break certain things, they can't be put back together. And a key example of this is there's been some pretty well publicized articles about Elon Musk firing people who are responsible for the nuclear arsenal in the United States, or nuclear energy, or who are responsible for the response to the bird flu epidemic, and then in short order rehiring them. So who knows whether those people got rehired, or whether this will create serious negative impacts. But it's safe to say that people are really worried about this. This is much larger and much more important than one company. We're talking about the United States of America versus one company in San Francisco. It's a different order of magnitude for sure.
Correct. I agree that if there's going to be cuts and it's going to affect federal agencies like aviation and national security, and just cutting employees, that's going to have an adverse effect on quality and the standards.
Look, I mean, you and I both, you're a practicing lawyer. I'm a former lawyer. It's safe to say that we're more on the conservative side. Like we would really advocate for doing things in a very measured, thoughtful way, because that's part of the training. The people in technology and who, aspire to do great things, like Elon Musk, who is sending rockets to Mars and single-handedly bringing electric vehicles or popularizing electric vehicles. These people have a very different mindset. And I think that they can point to those successes and say that, look, I mean, we have a track record of doing amazing things. And if you want progress, you have to take risk. I think that's what they would say. But I do know that it's undeniable there's a human cost. I mean, if you just put yourself in the shoes of all these federal workers, and it's not just, fringe departments. I mean, some of these departments are like mission critical departments, like the CIA, the FBI, the FAA. These are departments, whose job it is to protect us. And if the morale of these people, or another example is the Department of Justice, if the morale of these people are damaged, that's going to take years to fix. And so that's the other thing. Like, as a business person, I know like how important it is to treat people well, because if you don't, your organization really suffers. So that's seriously, it's very concerning to me as well.
Yeah, just switching to a different topic, though, about I had mentioned how capital gains could be treated differently under Trump's government. There's a new court case that could make unrealized capital gains taxable. And so that's a big change, because up until now, the law is that capital gains are payable when something is sold. So when it's concrete, it is derived from proceeds. And so, unfortunately, if capital gains are going to be taxed even when it's unrealized, that could be a big problem, because it could have because later, if you're taxed on an unrealized gain and then you lose it, how does that all work from an accounting point of view? So it is very troubling, but that is potentially something that could materialize, and I think we need to keep a close eye.
Is that something that'll impact equity holders of private companies, such as venture-backed companies in Silicon Valley?
That could. I mean, I think that is where his billionaire friends that are close to Trump could change his position on it, or modify his position so that they don't actually have to pay for those unrealized capital gains.
It certainly would be a big hit to his billionaire friends who invest in these companies, but also for employees of tech companies. A substantial amount of their compensation is in equity. And if you're at a private company, you're working for a startup, I mean, all those gains are unrealized, or not, almost all those gains are unrealized. And if you're an engineer in San Mateo or in Mountain View, and suddenly you're taxed on unrealized gains, that could be a huge liability for you, and you may not have the ability to pay that tax, the liquidity, yeah, because you're holding private shares. So that's really concerning, I think, for people in the Bay Area.
I agree. And the fact that those unrealized gains could actually turn out to be losses. And then who's going to get the money back after, right? Does the taxpayer get that money that they paid to the government prematurely?
You would hope so, but you would think that you would anticipate the government would be happy to take the money first, but if there are losses, they may give you credit or a deduction or something, but it seems unlikely that they'll send you a check back.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like wishful thinking to me.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Any other proposed legislation that you're aware of that we should talk about, or that our listeners should be aware of?
Aside from the estate tax exemptions, which are at 14 million, and then per person, which for a married couple is 28 million, there is definitely discussion and drafts that are being proposed in Washington where the threshold would be 30 million to have an additional tax imposed, and then at a 50 million level to have taxes imposed. So there's definitely the 30 million, 50 million, and the $1 billion level that individuals in that category can expect more taxes.
Wow. And can you elaborate on that? What is that? Just maybe we dive deeper on how would those taxes be calculated, and what maybe we could talk about some concrete examples for people who have quite a bit of net worth.
Okay, so for instance, it's still things are still moving, and but I read that between if somebody had a more than 50 million, they can expect to pay an extra 2% annually on that amount that they have, and so and then as well as a 3% tax on their net worth if it's over $1 billion. So there's going to be an annual tax, and then also a net worth tax as well.
Wow. So if you have net worth of 50 million, you could, if this passes, you could pay $1 million a year if it's 2% on your tax every year, just because you've been successful in your life and you've got net worth. I think that's going to disappoint a lot of people. That's a lot of money.
That is a lot of money, and it's going to be a lot of money for the government, especially when they're also trying to cut a lot of corners and cut costs. So that's going to be a lot of extra money in their hands.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, it seems like now more than ever, it's so important to have good tax and legal advisors, and obviously to to protect your money from an investment perspective. But things are happening so quickly now that if you aren't, or your advisors aren't keeping on top of this, you could really be you could really be blindsided by some of these changes.
It's really important to have a good team of advisors. I mean, anytime that I speak to my clients, I also want to know who they have for their tax and who is managing their money if there is somebody, just so that at least those of us that are helping the client can all be transparent and communicate to one another.
Yeah, so important. Well, I think that's a great place to park it for this episode. If you enjoy this content, we'd be extremely grateful if you would click on the subscribe button and like it and share this with your friends or colleagues. And we're having a lot of fun producing this content. And if you want to see more of it, please let us know. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the comments and we'll get right back to you.
And we're always thinking of new topics to talk about. So if you have something you'd like us to cover, please leave it in the comments, and you'll save us a little bit of thinking of what to speak on next.
Totally agree. Well, thanks very much, everybody. I'll see you next week.
We'll see you again.